All right, today's video I'm really excited about. I'm gonna be showing you one of my favorite neighborhoods. Yes, it is a Vancouver neighborhood, but in fact, it was actually Vancouver's first suburb. It's really old, it's been around a long time. For a long time, it was kind of out of favor, but in recent years, I'd say in the last 20, maybe 30 years, it's been building momentum, and today, it's really probably one of the most popular places in the entire city. In fact, it's been rated as the coolest neighborhood, and it's also been rated as the least disliked by Reddit. So it's got a lot going for it. I'm really excited to show you all about Vancouver's Mount Pleasant neighborhood. Let's get into it. The reason for Mount Pleasant's popularity over 100 years ago and still today is it's incredibly central, it's incredibly close to downtown, and it's easy to get pretty much anywhere. So it's bound by 2nd Avenue to the north, that's just in behind me, 16th Avenue to the south, Cambie to the west, and Clark Drive to the east. Within that area, you have a lot of variations in commercial spaces, types of homes that people are living in, the types of people, a diversity of people that live here. But its central focus is Main Street, very specifically Main and Broadway. That is the core of Mount Pleasant that we see today. In terms of how we got here, its history, it was Vancouver's first suburb. People began to settle in this area in 1888. And the main reason for it was that breweries opened up on this side. They were attracted by what was then called Brewery Creek because of the number of breweries that opened up around that and light industry that opened up. Between 1888 and 1912, dozens of breweries opened up. The types of people that were attracted to live in Mount Pleasant were working class. So it was a very basic type of living arrangement, very simple homes, not a lot of money. Sort of over time, the popularity of Mount Pleasant diminished as other areas of the city opened up for settlement. So more attractive, higher end areas like Grandview Woodlands, like Kitsilano. So people spread out from Mount Pleasant, and it really lost a lot of its attractiveness for decades, really, until I'd say maybe in the 90s. And so from the 90s on, it's seen a greater amount of desirability and focus, and a lot of gentrification has happened in that time where it's pretty much unrecognizable from what it was obviously in the late 1800s, but even what it was in the 60s and 70s. There's still a diversity of what is offered, and you do see as we explore that there's some old buildings, some new, brand new things being built up beside an old house that's basically falling apart. So what it attracts is people that appreciate that diversity, appreciate that history, really love the location and the central location of it in the entire city. So what is Mount Pleasant? Most people would define Mount Pleasant by people that live there, and a lot of people are identified as hipsters. I think it's considered a cool neighborhood, it's a fun neighborhood, eclectic, diverse. What I find interesting is in terms of demographics, it's actually less diverse than most of the rest of the city. Funny enough, there's 35,000 people that live in Mount Pleasant. 65% of them identify as having European heritage. That's way above the average for the city. The average for Vancouver is actually just 43%. It's much more European than the rest of the city is. But it is pretty socioeconomically diverse. There's a lot of different people from different walks of life that live in Mount Pleasant. And I think that's part of what makes it quite interesting. There's a lot of wealth. Some of the new homes that you're gonna see could be as much as $5 million. Actually, there was one that just sold recently that was 5.25 million. And then there's a significant amount of social housing at the other end of the spectrum. And then there's a lot in between. And all these people live happily, connectedly together in this neighborhood. The other thing I think that's really important to note is that it's generally a fairly young population that lives in Mount Pleasant. Younger than many other parts of the city, perhaps not as young as an area like Kitsilano or downtown Vancouver, Yaletown, but it is much younger than most of the city, with 60% of the population actually under 40 years of age. It's a very vibrant, happening, colorful place with a lot of diversity, a little bit of grit that people really love and feel very incredibly connected to, and a strong sense of community. That's definitely part of the Mount Pleasant vibe. Pleasant, and you're thinking of making Mount Pleasant or Vancouver your home, be sure to reach out anytime. I'm a real estate agent that's helped hundreds of people settle in Vancouver, and I can help you as well. My contact information is right there on the screen. Reach out anytime at your convenience, no rush, no pressure. we can get that conversation started and start on your move to Vancouver. Now let's get back to the video. So amenities are an enormous attraction to Mount Pleasant. And in fact, I live just up Main Street and I spend a lot of time down in Mount Pleasant because there is so much going on, both for my kids as well as for myself for adult fun. It's really anchored with the Mount Pleasant Community Center. In fact, I was just there a couple weeks ago. It was my daughter's 5th birthday. It was a fantastic place to have a birthday party. They open up the gym, there's tons of toys, there's the bouncy castle, and then there's a room that you get to hang out in and have your cake and stuff. And the best part, I have to say, is that you don't have to do any of the cleanup. Somebody else does that for you. So it's well worth it. It's not all that expensive. But yeah, the community center is there. There's a gym, there's a public library. It's really a central gathering place for the Mount Pleasant community. And then there's neighborhood parks. There's something like in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 parks throughout Little Mountain. Probably the best known one would be Dude Chilling Park. And that's a park that's another fantastic gathering place for the community. In the summer months, you're going to see tons of people out there, their blankets spread, having barbecues, just chilling, hanging out, having a beer. But there are tons of other parks throughout Mount Pleasant that are exceptional places for gathering and for children having fun. And another thing that Mount Pleasant is really known for would be restaurants. And there's exceptional restaurants everywhere in Mount Pleasant. Some of my favorites would include Salvio Volpe, Les Faux Bourgeois, Burdock and Company, and Tocador. There's really a range from really high-end restaurants where you can have a really full-on dining experience to quick and easy, I don't know, shawarma or pizza, that type of thing. Tons of sushi places as well, but yeah, real fine, exceptional dining experiences available. Oh, another one is Zarak. It's an Afghan restaurant that I just went to. I think that was one of our last date nights about a month ago. We're going to a hockey game and my wife made a reservation at Zarak. Amazing food, highly recommend that. That's a little bit on the higher end, but if you want to splurge a little bit, that's a good place to go. Breweries, that's definitely something that Mount Pleasant is known for. It's really the brewery district of the entire city. And so kind of north of Broadway, between 2nd and Broadway is where you're going to find most of those. 33 Acres, Main Street Brewing, and Brass Neck are 3 of the best known. Personally, they're not my favorites because I don't really like beer. I'm a bit of an oddity, but for those that do, those would be breweries to check out. And then cafes, coffee culture is definitely something that Mount Pleasant is known for. Tons of them around, but 3 of my favorites would be Our Town, 49th Parallel, and Forecast. They're all exceptional. Oh, and JJ Bean would be yet another really great coffee place in Mount Pleasant. Shopping, tons of shopping around Main Street, and it's pretty diverse and eclectic. There's lots of small mom and pop shops that are still around, but then there's sort of larger, cool clothing stores like 8th and Main, like Front and Company. So a lot of people do their clothing shopping in that sort of area. There's a lot to offer. And then there's this weird throwback, I'd say, to the mid-80s. It's Kingsgate Mall. And if you want your fill of the hipster vibe, that's definitely a place to check out. It's pretty cool. It's where the main grocery store, the Buy Low Foods, is for the Mount Pleasant community. And then in terms of nightlife, there's no real clubs or anything in Mount Pleasant. I mean, you really have to go downtown for that. That's the only area where you're going to find. But aside from downtown, it really is the alternative center for nightlife, centered around those breweries and quite a few bars. Some of my favorite bars. In fact, if I'm going out for a drink with a buddy, it's probably to the Cascade Room or to the Narrow Lounge, but there's a number of those. And then there's also the Fox Cabaret, which is kind of a venue for a variety of shows and that type of thing. And the Biltmore as well does a lot of sort of smaller music shows, music venue. Those are probably the 2 places that you're going to see the most going on in Mount Pleasant. So I'm walking up this hill right now and whoa! Those are a lot of pigeons. There's a little group of pigeons somebody was feeding there. That just freaked the hell out of me. That just scared me, obviously. So just walking up this hill, and that's something that you do have to be aware of when you're living in Mount Pleasant, that there are hills. It is a mount, and the benefit of it is that you get some incredible views, but the downside is it takes a little bit of work getting up these hills. All right, so now that I'm sitting down, let's get into the housing. I know that's top of mind for a lot of you watching this video if you're thinking of moving here from somewhere else, or if you're already living in Vancouver but want to get a handle on what it's like living in Mount Pleasant. This is going to be foremost on your mind. What is housing? What's the cost? What are the options? Now, the thing about Mount Pleasant is that there's a wide variety of housing options. Because of its age, how slow it's developed quite naturally. And originally, there was a lot of small single detached houses that were built in the late 1800s, early 1900s. a lot of that has been leveled and new stuff has been built over the intervening 150 odd years, obviously. I'd say like in the early 1900s, there were some apartment buildings that were built as an example. And that continued through, you know, to the 50s, 60s, purpose-built apartment buildings. You also have houses that were built more in the 70s and 80s, and then a lot of modern houses that have been built as well, like in the last 10 years or so. You have a lot of the house stock specifically is really old and has been renovated for the most part, or has been leveled completely, and apartment buildings or condos or brand new, very modern houses have been built in their stead. So lots of options. There's also options for renting, and more renting options than most areas of the city, as there's a lot of purpose-built apartment buildings that have been built here over the years. So in terms of houses, what we see, the typical house in Mount Pleasant at the moment in November of 2023 is $1,765,800. That's lower than is typical for the city of Vancouver, but obviously still a very big sum. And you'd be looking at about $1.5 million for just lot value, around $2.2 million for a pretty nice renovated house of some kind that's a little bit older, most likely. And then $3 to $4 million for a brand new, very modern, luxurious new construction. It runs the gamut in terms of prices, obviously. Now, in terms of townhouses and duplexes, this is definitely a neighborhood where you see a lot of townhouse development. It is more densely populated, and it's allowed that density to be built for quite some time. So if you're looking for townhouses, this is certainly one of the neighborhoods where townhouses are going to be coming up and will be an option for you. And the typical townhouse at the moment, again in November of 2023, is $1,236,700. Again, fairly significant sum, but lower than what you're going to see typically in much of the city of Vancouver. And then condos, that number is $753,600. And again, with condos, there's a wide variety of age and style. You have these buildings still from the 70s, I would say. You know, it's 4-story buildings, usually an elevator, but sometimes a walk-up, large rooms, no in-suite laundry, quite often. Prices are going to be a lot lower on that type of product per square foot than the new construction, which is also available. And you see some really significant new concrete towers that have been built in the last few years. Incredible views, small rooms, small square footage, really nice amenities, but a much higher cost per square foot. So you have both those options. And then a little bit unusual for Vancouver is artist loft, live work type of option, a real center of those around Main and Fifth, where I'd say there's probably about 10 different buildings in that neighborhood that offer that sort of alternative type of accommodation that a lot of people really love. So you do have that option, and if you're looking for it, this is one of the only places in the city of Vancouver that you're going to be finding it. And then in terms of rent, you're looking at typical rent, sort of the median rent these days in November of 2023 is $2,750 per month. And that's typically just going to be one, maybe 2-bedroom condo sort of running around there. But that's about 10% less than what you'd be spending if you're living in downtown Vancouver, where it would be about $3,100. So you are, just by crossing False Creek, getting out of downtown, you're saving about 10% just by moving across the water here in Mount Pleasant. Lots of housing options, gives you an idea of sort of what the costs are there. Now, from here, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the studio, and I'm going to sit down with you and take a look at the map and run you through exactly the different areas, what kind of housing options you're going to see in different areas, what kind of businesses are in each, where the busy areas are, just to give you a feel of the neighborhood. So let's head back into the studio now. So here's the map of Vancouver. We're going to take a look at where Mount Pleasant is, kind of what the different parts of Mount Pleasant are like. So getting into the map right here. City of Vancouver, obviously we know where that is. Just going to point it out. It's right here. That's the city of Vancouver. So let's look right here at where we are. 2nd Avenue to the north, Cambie Street to the west, and 16th to the south, all the way over to Clark Drive, takes that little jog here, up to Great Northern Way, which is actually, it's a funny road. Great Northern Way over here, it's 2nd Avenue over here, and it's 6th Avenue over here, but that's all the same street that winds its way. In any case, we're calling this, for the purposes of this video, that's just 2nd to the north, Cambie Street to the west, To the south, it's 16th, and to the east, it's Clark Drive, and that is Mount Pleasant, where 35,000 Vancouverites live. And that's the area that we're exploring in this video. Now, I do want to just point out how these areas are different. Now, this area right here, this is the industrial zone. This area over here, this is predominantly apartments and condos, townhouses as well, but high density versus, it's pretty rare to find single family homes in this area. And then over here, what we're finding sort of in this zone, that's predominantly condos. Same thing kind of on this side of Main Street. Those are condos mostly that you're gonna find in there. This area right here, that's predominantly single family residential with half duplexes, some townhouses, but mostly single family and half duplexes. And then this area is almost exclusively in here, single family residential. Sorry, I shouldn't make that a C, but just pop in right here, first of all, just to take a look at that industrial zone. Take this little guy and drop him right in there. All right, so you can see generally pretty low rise, some old warehouses, some like mechanic, auto body shops. There's bakeries. There's this nice big park with a great coffee shop across the street there. Dog kennels, that's another type of business that you find in here. Real estate offices, a few of those. A couple old houses, but those are generally, they'll have businesses in them, and they're zoned commercial. There's print shops, that's another type of business, but then you also see this type of structure right here, these new office buildings, and that's something that's been transitioning this neighborhood in the last 5, maybe 10 years. You can see this one's just finishing construction, workers still outside, but really cool modern buildings being built in this neighborhood, but it is mostly sort of office type buildings that are being built. There are a couple loft buildings, condo buildings, but that's pretty rare. So it gives you an idea of what this part of Mount Pleasant is like. And then just to jump over where we said the condos were in this zone, and right in the center of it, actually, this is a good spot to jump in because this is obviously an older apartment building. So purpose-built apartments for rent and not condos. Sort of a building that's probably built in the 50s over there. Another one maybe in the late 60s, early 70s, apartment building. And then what do we have here? Looks like, I think those are, that might be a half duplex. I have a couple buildings here that there's a nice new house right here. And then here's some townhouses. And then this is a bit closer to Broadway. You can see a newer building there. Then if we jump close to Main Street, you'll see that the buildings are much, much newer. And this is right at Brewery Creek, actually. So this is a converted historic building that's been converted to loft condos, which is a pretty cool place. But you can see all around are these newer construction, larger condominium buildings, Main Street. And then when we look south of Broadway, along Clark, that boundary of Mount Pleasant to 16th, in here, this zone is predominantly single family residential. Popping up here on the street, you can see these older homes, a lot of sort of simple houses built in the early 1900s. A lot of them have been renovated. They're really cute. And then you get a few like this house right in front of us here. That's a half duplex, side by side. So you see more and more of that in this neighborhood as well. This is a house currently undergoing renovations. But that's mostly either half duplexes or single family residential in that zone. And in here, again, south of Main, between Main and Fraser, you're going to see condominiums and apartment buildings, sort of higher density stuff built in there quite a bit. So you can see there's townhouse development. There's looks like condos. No, that's an apartment building, but condos being built next door. an apartment building or condos right across the street as well. So higher density in this zone around the hospital, between the hospital and Main Street. And then when we're looking west of Main, and south of Broadway, this area again is usually a higher density. We'll take a quick jump in there. So you see some older houses, but you're also seeing apartment buildings, small condo buildings as well, some townhouse developments. And now we're heading a little further. As we head further west, you're going to see more single family residential and more half duplexes. That area is right in here where it's mainly single family and half duplexes. So that gives you an idea of sort of all the different regions of Mount Pleasant. So all of Mount Pleasant being right in here. And I hope that really gives you a better understanding of what it's like in Mount Pleasant and all the different segments of Mount Pleasant and what that might offer you. The main commercial strip is Main Street right here. You also have Broadway that's cutting right through there. So that intersection of Main and Broadway is the primary intersection of the neighborhood. A lot of commercial on both those strips, and we are getting the new SkyTrain running right along Broadway, where I showed you, I have some clips of the SkyTrain under construction. It should be done within the next year and a half or so, and that's really going to change the dynamics of this neighborhood as well. Now, let's get back out into the street and talk about the pros and the cons of Mount Pleasant. If you're getting value out of this video, be sure to hit the like button, smash the subscribe button to see more videos like this one. I put out videos about living in and moving to Vancouver every single week. Now let's get back to the video. So now we're going to talk about the pros and the cons of living in Mount Pleasant. And it's really hard to confine the list of pros, to be honest. It's a fantastic neighborhood. I love it. Everybody seems to love it. In fact, it's been rated regularly as one of the coolest neighborhoods in all of Canada, regularly rated as one of the most popular neighborhoods in the city of Vancouver. As I mentioned in the intro, it's also been voted on Reddit sort of as a joke a little bit, but as the least hated neighborhood in the city. And I think that says quite a lot too, although it could just say that a lot of people that live in Mount Pleasant are also active on Reddit. I don't know, but you can decide for yourself. So in terms of pros, number one would really be its central location. It is very centrally located, just on the cusp of downtown, but it's really easy to get from the west side to the east side. Is right in the middle of the city, and to the south and to the north as well. So a lot of people that live here, you know, that's really where the popularity originally came from, why people first moved out of downtown Vancouver to settle here in Mount Pleasant. But it continues to be, I would say, the number one reason that it's such a popular destination for people. Ease of access is only going to be improving, as they're actually just finishing construction of the Broadway SkyTrain line. So at the moment, there's no SkyTrain directly sort of in the middle of Mount Pleasant. There is the Clark SkyTrain station, which is sort of on one edge of it at roughly 2nd and Clark. And then there's another one just to the north down Main Street at Terminal. But what they are building is from that Clark Drive SkyTrain station, they're building an extension along Broadway. The main hub is going to be at Main and Broadway. That's just well under construction at the moment. I think it's about a year away from being completed, but that's going to really improve the accessibility and the ease of access that people have when they're living in Mount Pleasant. Number two is it's already an extremely walkable neighborhood, more so than most places in Vancouver, and Vancouver is a highly walkable city. It's insane in Mount Pleasant, where everything is at your doorstep, whether it's, you know, a cafe, a restaurant, the community center, getting to work downtown, whether you want to walk, bike, take the bus, SkyTrain, those are all options, but everything is really within sort of a 10-15 minute walk when you're living in Mount Pleasant. And number three is its neighborhood feel. There's a real strong sense of community amongst the people that live in Mount Pleasant, whether you're living in an affordable living situation, renting a place, or you own a multi-million-dollar house. Everybody is sort of interconnected in this neighborhood. Unlike some of the neighborhoods in Vancouver, there's definitely some areas where there's less of a neighborhood, a sense of community. This area has a very strong identity and a very strong neighborhood feel. Another big pro is that it's incredibly family friendly. There's really easy access to schools, parks, and a lot of really cool kid-oriented options. I mentioned going to the community center for my kid's birthday. My son is in a parkour gym in Mount Pleasant, which is amazing. I don't know if you've ever checked out parkour, but it's like the male version of ballet, or I should say, actually, it's the male version of gymnastics. But my son Cass is a bit of a monkey, and he has an exceptional ability to control his body. And I'm really seeing him come into his own through these parkour classes that he's taken. But in any case, there's lots of family-friendly opportunities in Mount Pleasant. Something I also haven't mentioned anywhere else in this video, but there's also some cool events and festivals that happen in Mount Pleasant. The two biggest ones that really come into mind, there's a car-free day down Main Street, which is a lot of fun. The whole street shuts down and everybody just has an enormous party on the street. And then Mural Festival. And you can see examples of sort of what ends up happening with the product of the Mural Festival, as you know, a lot of the blank faces of the buildings around Mount Pleasant come alive and are colorful and really make the entire neighborhood much more vibrant and cool and interesting. Those are all things I think that people love about living in Mount Pleasant. Now, of course, there's cons as well, but honestly, it's pretty hard for me to come up with a list of cons for living in Mount Pleasant. There's so much going for it, as I've said over and over again. It's an amazing place to live, but it isn't perfect. And a couple of those cons that come to mind, the most obvious one is really the cost of living. And that's really a con of every neighborhood in Vancouver, unfortunately, because there's no cheap place to live. And we've been through the cost of housing already. It's a significant investment to live in the city of Vancouver and to live in the Lower Mainland anywhere, but especially when you're so close to downtown. And as we said, you know, prices aren't as high as they are in the downtown core, but they're pretty close. You're looking at about a 10% discount to be in Mount Pleasant. So cost is the biggest con. Number two is that it's a relatively noisy place. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of people living very close together. And so, you know, if you want peace and quiet, if you want it to be tranquil, this isn't the place. There is a hustle and bustle to Mount Pleasant that you don't necessarily see in an area like South Vancouver or Marpole, but Mount Pleasant has that. And that can be a pro for some people, but I'm putting it in this cons category because I'm just trying to come up with some cons for you. And number three is that on top of the noise, because of that density, it can also be a very busy place. There's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of people around. It's hard to find some serenity, some solitude. Even, you know, you can tell just doing this video, I'm trying to find places where there's not too much going on, but there's always people in the background. There's always cars driving around. And if you have watched some of my other videos like this, like in North Vancouver as an example, that would be a much more suburban feel where there's not nearly as much going on in a lot of that community. But here in Mount Pleasant, there's a hustle and bustle, there's a vibrancy, and it can definitely be busy, and that can impact people's quality of life. It's not for everyone. And there's our tour of Mount Pleasant. I hope you enjoyed that. I had a lot of fun touring you around, showing you one of my favorite Vancouver neighborhoods. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and smash the subscribe button if you want to see more videos just like this one. I do put out videos like this every single week, moving to living in Vancouver. And if you are thinking of moving to Vancouver, be sure to reach out anytime. I am a real estate agent that's helped hundreds of people move to Vancouver, and I can help you too. My contact information is right here on the screen. And also be sure to check out my other videos. I have tons, over 40 videos at the moment, and there's a couple I think you might want to check out. I do have one about living in Little Mountain. Check that one out over here. And then check out this playlist if you are thinking of buying in Vancouver. It's all about the different types of housing, what you want to look out for when you're buying a house, a townhouse, or a condo. I'll see you on next week's video. Thank you so much for watching.